Hello sports fans, my name is Professor S, and today it is brother against brother as we talk American Civil War. This is Hasty History. What were the big causes of the American Civil War? Now obviously slavery is the big one, but there's more to it than just slavery. See, in the antebellum South, their economy was hugely dependent on cash crops, things like cotton. Cotton was farmed on large plantations worked by slaves. The difference is, the people in the North, whose economy wasn't quite that reliant on cash crops, they wanted to abolish slavery. So because some of the states wanted to keep slavery and some of them wanted to abolish it, that led to some pretty big disagreements in the American government. The problem is this: after the Mexican-American War, all of these new states and territories were being added to the US. So the question became whether they were going to become free states or slave states, because that would have changed the balance of power in the government. This argument came to a head in what's called Bleeding Kansas, which is the name for a series of armed skirmishes in Kansas to decide whether it would be a free state or a slave state. In 1846, the Wilmot Proviso was introduced, and this would have made slavery illegal in all of the new states that were being added. But the Wilmot Proviso doesn't pass. Another option people were tossing around was what was called popular sovereignty, and what that meant was basically that each state could decide for themselves whether they were going to be slave or free. More and more ideas and arguments were being tossed around and making everybody on both sides even madder. The Dred Scott decision, for example, said that slaves in slave states, if they went into free states, were still considered slaves. The fugitive slave laws said that any slaves who escaped into the North could actually be captured and brought back to their slave owners. The novel Uncle Tom's Cabin painted a portrait of slavery in the South that made everybody mad. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected President of the United States, and it's Lincoln's idea to just contain slavery to the South and hopefully it'll die out. Of course, the South wants to expand slavery, but the real problem is that Lincoln got elected without carrying a single Southern state. So the South is thinking to themselves, okay, if this guy can get elected without us voting for him, why did we bother voting? And if our votes don't matter, why are we even in the Union? The South secedes from the Union in 1861, and they do it for two big reasons. Slavery, yes, but also for states' rights, which is the idea that states should be able to govern themselves rather than have to listen to some big federal government in the North that they didn't vote for anyway. The Southern states start calling themselves the Confederate States of America, and they elect their own president, a guy named Jefferson Davis. One of the first things the Confederacy does is the attack and capture of Fort Sumter, and this is usually considered the first real battle of the Civil War. After Fort Sumter, more states join the Confederacy, and we have a full-blown Civil War. General Robert E. Lee is the guy the Confederates picked to lead their army. The guy that eventually leads the Union Army is named Ulysses S. Grant. The first big battle of the Civil War is the Battle of Bull Run in 1861, which the Confederates are able to win because they bring in troops on the railroad. See, the Civil War is one of the earliest industrial wars. It's the first war where we really see telegraphs being used, cargo ships, railroads, factories, civilian resources, stuff like that. And all of this is going to come back in a big way when the United States gets involved in World War I. It's around this time that President Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which proclaims the freedom of all the slaves in the Confederacy. See, before, he had just wanted to contain slavery in the South, but the Emancipation Proclamation actually makes freeing the slaves a war goal. The biggest battle in the Civil War is the Battle of Gettysburg. This is where the Union Army is able to stop General Lee's incursion into the North. It's 3 days of fighting with more than 50,000 soldiers dead on both sides. Now, when the Union is able to send the Confederates into a retreat, it's basically considered the turning point in the Civil War. After Gettysburg, General Ulysses S. Grant decides he wants to hit the Confederacy in a bunch of different places. The most famous of these is Major General William Sherman's March to the Sea. He takes his army, he goes deep behind enemy lines, and they march from Atlanta, Georgia to Savannah, Georgia, practicing what we call total war. This is where he's destroying and burning farms, factories, railroads, and all sorts of Confederate infrastructure. Finally, in 1865, General Lee and his army find themselves surrounded by Union forces in Virginia. Lee has to surrender to Grant, and the war is over. Less than a week later, though, President Lincoln is assassinated by a Southern sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth. There are two big things to remember about the aftermath of the Civil War: the 13th Amendment and Reconstruction. So yeah, Lincoln is already given the Emancipation Proclamation, but it's not until late in 1865 that the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is formally adopted, and it's the 13th Amendment that formally abolishes slavery throughout the United States. Now, after the Civil War, the economy in the South is a huge mess. Reconstruction is the word that we use to describe cleaning up that mess, and it took decades afterwards. Reconstruction is also the name of an era in American history. So that's it for the American Civil War. I've been Professor S. This has been the Civil War. This has been Hasty History, and you, stay hasty, my friends.